Let's talk about intonation. Action. Hello and welcome to another episode of Violin Playing
Explained.
If you're new to this channel, welcome, hit the subscribe button and a notification bell. I like to believe that the stuff I post is quite helpful, in my humble opinion. Okay, let's get into it. Playing in tune is one of those things that are considered the bare minimum for a violinist to be considered decent. Which is funny because at the same time it's one of the hardest things to do on the violin. You're not even considered an okay player if you play out of tune, and yet it's one of the hardest things to do. So the bare minimum is at the same time one of the hardest things on the violin to do. That only tells you how difficult violin playing actually is. Also, it's a consistent and lifelong battle. You can't just learn intonation and just be good for the rest of your life.
I think I got everything. I'm all set. Thank you.
Even just a day or two without good quality practice is gonna harm your intonation. You have to constantly recalibrate your fingers. It's not easy. But then again, you didn't start playing the violin because it was gonna be easy. You did it to make your parents happy. At this point you may say, well, why don't I just play piano or the guitar or something with frets on it so I don't have to deal with all this? But believe me, it has its great upsides. Not having a tempered tuning where all the half steps are the same size is an incredibly expressive tool. If you play a really close half step, it can be incredibly expressive, something that only a singer could do. Okay, now that we have established that life is hard, let's see how we can make it a little less miserable. I think there are two aspects to great intonation. The first one is the finger landing as close as possible to the right spot, and the second one is the ability to correct immediately once your finger's on the fingerboard. Most major intonation issues can be fixed by just having a good left-hand setup, where the fingers are pretty much already at the right spot, or as close as possible to it. There's a separate video on my channel about just the left hand where I talk in great detail about it. I'll link the video right here and also at the end of this video. As a little summary, I would say your hand has to be exactly the same no matter what position you're in, what string you're playing on. It has to be just exactly the same. I like to have my hand set up in a way that I basically have a perfect fourth already here set up in my left hand. Later on in this video, I'll explain how exactly I find that perfect fourth. Even though a great left hand setup can help a lot with intonation issues, it doesn't eradicate those completely. What you need to learn is making last millisecond adjustments that are so quick that even the listener can pick up that you were just correcting something. I think while you're performing, actually, you're always kind of fixing whatever is happening here, just by maybe a little bit of a roll with the finger or stuff like that, just really minuscule distances. In order to improve your intonation, two things I would definitely suggest to you is practicing scales, which are great for a number of reasons, and also my beloved first book of shredding. Scales are an incredibly helpful tool because they teach you how to listen, how to adjust your intonation, and also in a way they help you to establish your left hand position. The way I practice intonation, whether it's in scales, shredding, or basically any piece that I'm preparing, is the following.
Drum roll, please. Can anybody guess?
New chairs?
No.
Comparing with open strings, but only some intervals. We only compare the perfect intervals, which means the unison, fourths, fifths, and octaves. We do not compare anything besides that. No seconds, no thirds, no sixths, no sevenths. I apply this every day. Basically, whenever I practice, that's what I'm doing. Let me show you how I would, for instance, practice a G minor scale. Okay, let's go note by note and I'll explain what I'm actually thinking. So we start with the G, no brainer. Then we have the A. I'm looking for the fourth, right? So I can compare the first finger with the D string. You'll be listening for the beat frequencies, or hopefully the lack thereof. Beat frequencies are the kind of wobble that you hear when two notes are really close together but not quite identical. Usually it's just a matter of a few hertz. Hear it wah 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 wah. The closer the two Ds get together, the slower the wobble becomes. Until it disappears completely. That's when you know it's perfect. So you can hear that kind of stuff with intervals too. So here's my A. This sounds good to me. Now the B flat, I just put it right next to my A. I can't compare it because that will be a third, and you don't want to compare thirds. C, unfortunately you can't compare it either, but fourth, there we go. I can compare this one for sure. This works for me. This E, again, fourth, so I'm comparing with the A string. Now the F sharp, I cannot technically compare it with the A string or the G string. But what I can do is checking the G string, and the F sharp is just basically right next to it. That's a great orientation point. A, compared it with obviously unison, right? B flat, also on the lower side. E. Now the G, I can't compare with the D string because the G and the D is basically a fourth with an octave on top, right? Right? It's a fourth and an octave on top of that, so we can compare that. A, octave easy. That D, again, fourth and an octave on top of that. E, fifth and an octave on top of that, so I can compare that with the A string as well. And the G you cannot really compare with A string, but what helps sometimes if you're not quite sure, just by checking like this. Sounds about right to me. Generally what I'm noticing is that F naturals, C naturals, E flats and B flats usually tend to be a bit on the high side. So I like to keep them really low most of the time. Obviously it depends on the scale that you're playing it, but generally I feel like somehow, I don't know what it is, but the finger somehow tends to always those notes a bit on the high side, so watch out for those. The more you practice this way, the faster you'll be able to fix the interval because of all this listening experience that you're gaining that's gonna help you to determine whether you are too high or too low. You'll develop what I like to call the ear-finger connection, where your ear tells you what's wrong and your finger being able to immediately fix it. Those adjustments are so quick that the listener has no idea that you're actually fixing something and simply perceives your playing as in tune. Besides scales, I also like working on intonation in Schradig exercises. I spoke about them in previous videos. I'm a huge fan of those. I think they're great for most things left hand, but here's how they can help you with intonation as well. You can practice your Schradig exactly in the same way how you're practicing your scales. Here's the exercise, right? So now, you heard this is too low? Bit on the high side. That's right, that sounds good to me. Octave. That will be a bit on the low side. Bit on the high side. There we go, now it's perfect. And then the E. Hear those beat frequencies? Nasty stuff. That sounds good to me. Once you have the first, third, and fourth finger in the first position in your hand, chances of you playing in tune are way higher already. What I would also encourage you to do is practicing your scales in thirds, sixths, and octaves. And if you're an overachiever, you can also add tenths and fingered octaves. There's our fourth. You see, this B flat, for instance, is a bit too high actually. But in this case, I have to prioritize the purity of the interval itself over the individual notes. So I would, if I play, this B flat is way too high, but with the D, it really works. Okay, now this one, I have the E, I can compare with the A string. Again, the C is probably a bit on the high side, but it's fine. I'm prioritizing the purity of the interval itself. Here I'm comparing the D, the G here, A here, again, this B flat is hopelessly too high, but it works in this context. Because if I play it as I would play normally, this is your third. Sounds a bit rough. Also this C. This is the kind of C I would play normally in a piece. Bit high. But here it works. This B flat is also too high, but it's fine because I'm actually first finding the D and then I'm adding the B flat, and then I'm trying to find the perfect third. You see here, this is a bit too low, too high. Here I can compare the G. And here I can compare the A with the E string even. There's my fourth. And so forth. I hope you get the idea. Another thing I really like to do is exaggerating the characteristics of a scale. Let's take the beginning of the Zigeunerweisen by Sarasate. You see what I'm doing is I'm really E flat really low, F sharp really high, and that just makes it so characteristic and so expressive. Especially in a fast passage, it just sounds way cleaner this way. So yeah, that's how I practice intonation. I practice this basically every single day like this. Like I compare it with open strings all the time. That's basically my life. Please like and subscribe and hit the notification bell if you thought it was helpful in some way. Please also write in the comment section how you deal with intonation issues. We can all help each other out here. Happy comparing with open strings and happy practicing. I'll see you in the next one.